I'm Turkanoki, and this is Fool's FAQ, a show where I take the internet's most burning questions and give you an answer that'll make you the smartest person at your next costume party. On today's episode, how Ireland invented your sugar high. Picture this. It's October 31st. You're standing on your neighbor's porch dressed as a vampire, holding out a plastic pumpkin bucket, waiting for them to drop a fun-sized Snickers into your loot, or a full-size Snickers if you got lucky. It's as American as apple pie, right? Well, wrong. Because here's something that might blow your mind. Halloween isn't American at all. In fact, the United States didn't even celebrate Halloween until the mid-1800s. And when early American colonists, the Puritans specifically, heard about this whole dressing up and wandering around in the dark thing, they were horrified. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. So where did Halloween come from? Why do we carve pumpkins? Why do we dress up in costumes? And most importantly, who decided it was a good idea to send children door to door demanding candy from strangers? So stick around, because Halloween's origin story is way stranger and way older than you think. So let's rewind about 2,000 years to ancient Ireland and Scotland. The Celts, the people living in these regions, celebrated a festival called Samhain. Now, the name literally translates to summer's end in Irish, and it marked one of the most important dates on the Celtic calendar. The transition from the light half of the year to the dark half. The harvest was over, winter was coming, and the new year was about to begin. But Samhain wasn't just about saying goodbye to summer. The Celts believed that on the night of October 31st, the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead became incredibly thin. Spirits, fairies, and all sorts of supernatural beings could cross over into our realm. Now, some of these spirits were friendly, like deceased ancestors coming home for a visit, but others, not so much. Now, to deal with this otherworldly invasion, the Celts developed some pretty specific rituals. They lit massive communal bonfires where they would burn the bones of slaughtered livestock, hence the term bonfire, which comes from bone fire, and families would extinguish their home fires and then relight them using flames from the communal bonfire, creating a symbolic bond throughout the community. They also left out food and drink as offerings to appease these wandering spirits. And here's where things get interesting. To avoid being harassed or, worse, harmed by malevolent spirits, the Celts would disguise themselves by wearing costumes and grotesque masks. And the idea was simple. If you looked like a ghost or demon yourself, the real ones might leave you alone. Now, fast forward a few centuries, Christianity is spreading across Europe, and the church has a decision to make about all these pagan festivals. Rather than trying to stamp out Samhain completely, which probably wouldn't have worked anyway, they decided to adapt it. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III dedicated a chapel in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome to honor all saints and martyrs. He designated November 1st as All Saints' Day, also known as All Hallows' Day, and the night before, All Hallows' Eve. Say that a few times fast, slow it together a bit, and you get Halloween. In 1837, Pope Gregory IV made All Saints' Day official throughout the entire Frankish Empire. Now, the church also established All Souls' Day on November 2nd, creating a 3-day period called All Hallowtide, dedicated to remembering the dead. But here's the thing. Even though the church put a Christian label on it, many of the old Samhain customs stuck around. People kept wearing costumes, lighting bonfires, and leaving out food. The Celtic traditions were too deeply rooted to disappear. Instead, they just got a new coat of religious paint. So now that leads us to the question of, why do we carve pumpkins? Well, this tradition comes from the Irish folktale about a man named Stingy Jack. Well, according to a legend, Jack was a clever trickster who repeatedly trapped the devil. Now, he made the devil promise that Jack would never go to hell. Sounds like a great deal, right? Well, when Jack eventually died, heaven didn't really want him either because of all of his scheming. So, Jack was actually doomed to wander the earth for eternity. Now, the devil, feeling slightly generous or maybe just amused, gave Jack a burning coal to light his way through the darkness. Jack carved out a turnip, placed a coal inside, and created a lantern to guide him on his endless journey. The Irish started calling this ghostly figure Jack of the Lantern, which eventually became Jack-o'-lantern. Now, to keep Stingy Jack and other evil spirits away, people in Ireland, Scotland, and England began carving scary faces into turnips, rutabagas, potatoes, and beets, placing candles inside them. Yes, turnips, not pumpkins. These carved turnip lanterns were genuinely terrifying. And if you've ever seen pictures of traditional Irish turnip jack-o'-lanterns, they look like something straight out of a nightmare. And I'll try to leave something in the description for you to check out below. Now, Pumpkins didn't actually enter the picture until Irish immigrants arrived in America in the 1800s and discovered that pumpkins were not only native to North America, but also much bigger and easier to carve than turnips. The jack-o'-lantern got a bright orange makeover, and an icon was born. So, what about the practice of going door to door for treats? Well, that actually has multiple origin stories, but they all trace back to medieval Europe. One tradition was called souling. Starting in the 15th century, poor people, often children, would go from house to house on All Souls' Day, offering to pray for the homeowner's deceased loved ones in exchange for soul cakes, which were these sweet little pastries made of spices and raisins, and Shakespeare even mentioned this practice in his 1593 play, The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Now, in Scotland and Ireland, there was a parallel tradition called guising. Children would dress up in costumes and go door to door, but instead of offering prayers, they would perform songs, poems, jokes, or other entertainment in exchange for food, coins, or treats. This was directly connected to the Samhain belief that spirits roam the earth, and people needed to either appease them or disguise themselves as them. So, as you may have noticed, both souling and guising involved costumes, going house to house, and receiving rewards, which sounds a lot like modern trick-or-treating, which is born from these medieval practices. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Early American colonists, especially the Puritans in New England, absolutely hated Halloween. They saw it as a pagan, Catholic, or just plain ungodly celebration and wanted nothing to do with it. So, the first couple of centuries in American history, Halloween basically didn't exist in the United States. That all changed in the 1840s. Ireland was hit by the Great Famine, also called the Great Irish Famine, which began in 1845, when a blight destroyed potato crops, the staple of the Irish diet. Over the next decade, more than 1 million Irish Catholics immigrated to the United States, fleeing starvation and devastation. They brought very little with them, but they brought their traditions. These Irish immigrants celebrated Halloween with guising, carved turnips, pranks, bonfires, and divination games. Americans then started adopting these customs, and Halloween slowly began to spread. By the early 1900s, Halloween parties, haunted houses, and costume celebrations were becoming common in many neighborhoods. But there was one problem. The pranks were getting out of hand. In the 1920s and 1930s, Halloween in America became associated with serious vandalism. What started as harmless mischief, soaping windows, toilet papering trees, moving outhouses, etc., escalated into genuine destruction. Young people would overturn cars, smash shop windows, tear down fences, set fires, and cause thousands of dollars in property damage. Chicago in the 1920s saw fires set to wagons, train cars, real estate offices, and even a 500-gallon tank of gasoline. In 1922 alone, Chicago recorded 115 fire alarms on Halloween night. About 90% of them real fires. People were injured, and at least one person died from smoke inhalation after Halloween pranksters set fire to a building. Detroit became infamous for Devil's Night, the night before Halloween, when arson became almost expected. In 1984, more than 800 fires were reported in Detroit during the 3-day period around Halloween. The city was overwhelmed, to say the least. So, something had to change. From that point, cities and towns began organizing family-friendly Halloween celebrations, parades, and community parties to give kids something constructive to do. Anoka, Minnesota, often called the Halloween capital of the world, held one of the first citywide Halloween parties in 1920, specifically to combat vandalism. The town gave kids activities, games, parades, and treats, channeling their energy away from destruction. And it worked. Vandalism dropped significantly. Other cities followed suit from there, and the key breakthrough, organized trick-or-treating. Now, I'd assume one of the questions you're wondering most around this topic is where the term trick-or-treat comes from. Well, it first appeared in North American newspapers in the 1920s, but the practice didn't become widespread until after World War II. During the war, sugar was rationed, so candy was scarce, but once rationing ended in the late 1940s, Halloween exploded. Candy companies saw an opportunity. They started producing individually wrapped, bite-sized candies perfect for handing out to trick-or-treaters. Suburbs were expanding rapidly, providing safe, walkable neighborhoods with lots of houses close together, and parents liked the idea of prepackaged candy because it seemed safer than homemade treats. By the 1950s, trick-or-treating had become the most dominant Halloween activity for children across the United States. Halloween transformed from a night of pranks and chaos into a candy-fueled, costume-wearing, door-to-door tradition. The candy industry loved it, and Halloween became one of the biggest candy-selling holidays of the year. second only to Christmas. So, how was Halloween created? Well, it's not a simple answer as you can see. Halloween is a 2,000-year-old tapestry woven from the Celts, who gave us the costumes, the bonfires, the belief in wandering spirits. The Christian church gave us the name Halloween. The Irish gave us jack-o'-lanterns and guising. Medieval Europeans gave us door-to-door begging for food. Irish immigrants brought it all to America in the 1840s, and American cities, desperate to stop Halloween vandalism, channeled all that chaotic energy into organized trick-or-treating in the 1920s through the 1950s. So, the next time you carve a pumpkin, remember, it used to be a turnip lit by a cursed Irishman's eternal ember. When you put on a costume, remember you're channeling a 2,000-year-old Celtic survival strategy. And when a kid shows up at your door demanding candy, remember, they're participating in a tradition that spans medieval soul cakes, Scottish performances, and the collective effort to save Detroit from burning down. Halloween wasn't created, it evolved, adapted, and survived across continents, centuries, and cultures. And that's way cooler than any ghost story. Thank you so much for listening to Fool's FAQ. Feel free to leave a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts, as it also helps new listeners discover the show. For more fascinating answers to your burning questions, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and always stay curious.